Today we're going to talk about a very hot topic, and that is workforce development. And I'm sure that you've heard a lot about this lately. Our workforce in this country is changing. For the first time in history, we have 5 generations of workers. And next year, over 50% of our workforce is going to be millennials. So there's a lot of different types of people and personalities. We're also facing one of the worst talent shortages in the history of our industry. So obviously we're not going to solve this problem in 25 minutes or however long that they give us. In fact, I don't even see it there. I see a clock there. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the issue and about solutions that we can all, each and every one of you in your seat, can do something inside of your own companies or for our industry to make a difference. So I'd like to introduce our panelists, which I'm so excited about. One thing I did want to share with you is there's a magazine that Nikki picked up, Convened magazine, which talks about multi-generational, I can't even say that word, but multi-generational teams. So this is the topic that we're seeing everywhere. And we just picked up this magazine. You might want to pick one up on your way out. So I'd like to first introduce Nicki Greenberg. Thank you for being with us. Nicki Greenberg is the founder of Women in PropTech. You just heard about PropTech, and you're going to hear a little bit more about that today. So she founded Women in PropTech. She's the leading, the leading global organization with a focus on innovation and the future of real estate. She entered the property industry through her established career in architecture, working with Lend-Lease and Koichi Takata Architects in Sydney, Australia. She holds a master's degree in both architecture and international business from UNSW. She was the head of marketing for a global Fortune 500 real estate developer before moving to New York in 2017 to work with Terra Holdings as Director of Innovation and Marketing. She is devoted to a not-for-profit charitable endeavors and currently serves as co-chair of ULI New York's Technology and Innovation Council. In 2005, she could be found in Thailand, rebuilding villages affected by the Southeast Asian tsunami. She now resides in New York. So welcome, Nikki. And next, very excited to welcome Steve Yapsuga to the panel today. Steve is a marketing channel strategist and tech entrepreneur. With over 20 years in emerging technologies, including infrastructure solutions, public safety, and smart city initiatives, Steve has been a trusted source in go-to-market strategies in the wireless telecommunications industry. Steve is the co-chair of the NEDAS Advisory Council and one of the original founding members of NEDAS. Steve is a 10-year board member of the Maryland, D.C. Wireless Association and Emerging Technologies board member of Dense Networks and Smart Cities. It's a Smart Cities social think tank. For the past 2.5 years, Steve is the director of sales at COMBA Telecom, a global wireless solutions company with U.S. offices in Silicon Valley. Steve received his Master's of Business Administration from Loyola University of Maryland, and of yesterday launched NEDAS Live, which I was a part of. Thank you, the new podcast. That was awesome. So welcome, Steve. And
Thank you.
I'm very excited that Dr. Kent Wessinger is here with us. I heard him speak in an event, maybe 6-7 weeks ago, and I said, you have got to fly to New York and speak to this group. In fact, if one of you could step out of the room and just tell everyone to get back in here, because you're going to hear something, please do, seriously, because you're going to hear something very special today that you've never heard at any event in the wireless industry, okay? And what we're going to talk about is going to be very unique with unique speakers. So Kent is the CEO of the Create to Elevate Research Lab, an MBA entrepreneurship faculty member at Galen University in Belize, director of Millennial Research for Red Rock Strategic Partners, and a keynote speaker at over 30 conferences per year. He has a PhD from Prescott College in sustainable education with a research emphasis in economic sustainability within structures suffering from workforce migration. He has a Master's of Arts in Practical Theology from Regent University and a Bachelor of Science in Business, management from Kennesaw State University. Wow. His book is Bridges Over Ladders. You may have seen it when you walked in today. Create a Future with Millennials, or Millennials Will Create a Future for You. And he's also author of Paradise Restored. So welcome, everyone. Super excited to be here. So let's talk about the current state of the workforce and the challenges that we're seeing. Steve, would you like to lead us off?
Okay, sure. So I guess I'm a Gen Xer, so naturally I have angst and resentment. No, well, I mean, that's just, in terms of a Gen Xer, that's typically what you'd feel. But I think when I'm looking at the scope of things, if you look around this room, you can ask everybody who's been promoted at least, more than once, who's been in either middle management or upper management. And I think that if you ask them how they got to where they are today in our industry, everybody has got a different story. And that is really concerning for those who are new into the workforce in high tech. Those that are moving into the 5G world and trying to find a path of where they need to go, it's very, very difficult. And I think the other problem is now companies are leaner. They have less people. There's less people doing more. And because of that, now what do? Where's the mentorship? There's a lack of mentorship. There's a lack of guidance. And so, when you're talking about millennials and now Generation Z, because now Generation Z is just coming in because, we've got, for Generation X, there's only about 50 million of us. Baby boomers, there's about 80 million. Millennials, you've got about 85. And then you've got Generation Z that's got about another 80 plus million. So, we're kind of like teetering here, but the problem is this mentorship. And so that's a major concern that I have.
Can I jump in defense of millennials? I feel like we're all having to announce, admit to what generation we're from and apologize for it in our mentalities. But I think what Steve's describing is that a way of getting into a role as a linear process. For us millennials, I'm going to embrace it. We're of a generation where we have access to a lot of information through the internet, which means that we don't need to specialize in one thing. We can have information across the board. So that linear pathway into a certain profession is not something that we're scared of. It's something that we do want to be a jack of all trades, a master of none. But I do understand that the difficulty is when you do need somebody that is highly technical and highly specialized, how you do find that person. And absolutely, it has to come through training in-house and that passing on of knowledge.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Kit, can you tell us a little bit about your work and your research, please?
Sure. The U.S. Census Bureau defines millennials as someone born between 1981 and 2000. As a matter of fact, if there's a millennial here, would you please raise up your hand? For a minute, it might get a little uncomfortable, but I will tell you that my research project is probably your closest friend. And I developed the research project because I was concerned about some observations that I had made, that most of the material that I had read, that I had found, that C-suite executives, managers, leaders were using to develop trajectories of growth for their millennial workforce were based on a very small scope of observation. In other words, what they were observing around the dinner table at night, or what they were observing on a street corner, or what they were seeing on the local news, they were using to develop trajectories of growth moving forward. And I struggled with that. And so as a result, I developed a research project that does nothing but contrast the firsthand voice of millennials to non-millennials, to baby boomers and Gen X. I have an online survey that has over 32,000 participants around the world that contrast the same 30 questions so that we can take that information and we can use it to develop an accurate and a valid trajectory of growth for our workforce moving forward. Because I'm very concerned that a lot of the material that I see written, that I see published on Amazon, that I see published around the world on this millennial workforce, I'm concerned that if people are using some of this small scope information, that 5 years from now, they're going to find a faulty structure that is going to implode. And so the reason for this research project is to give you a tool so that you can use, a step-by-step tool so that you can use and show you how to develop a millennial workforce in contrast, because there is a great conflict between the millennials and the demographics before them, so that you have a tool to accurately and validly develop a trajectory of growth moving forward with this workforce.
Okay, wonderful.
Well, we're talking about training, but I think we have to look at the landscape here. I mean, if you've seen Brendan Carr, FCC commissioner, talking about we've got over 200,000 towers in the US. And when we're talking about the growth for 5G, he's saying that we're gonna need a 100x deployment, which would result in 20,000 new tower workers, just tower workers alone, that we need for the workforce. So, back in the day, we would go to school, we get a job, and we don't go back to school. But what's happening now is people have to continue to relearn. They have to go back, and whether it's gonna be re-education or whether it's gonna be apprenticeships, there's gotta be something that helps bridge that divide. And we're starting to do apprenticeships, but we've gotta do a much better job.
Well, I think there's another way of looking at it, actually, and I think it comes down to how do we consume information? Where do we find information? And, we traditionally talk about reskilling, about studying, about going to a course, etc. But, think about it. Where do we get our news from? And a lot of it is actually from online. How do you learn to cook? You watch YouTube. So maybe it is about making more palatable, consumable content that's accessible to people to get that bite-sized nugget bit of information. If I have a technical problem trying to fix my, my email program or whatever, I go onto Google. So maybe we need to rethink this.
There are some groups out there that are starting to make some nice, first steps. I mean, nobody's crushing it by any means, but I mean, I would say, for WIA, for example, TIRAP, they're starting to make some initiatives for education. There's some community colleges. We can certainly talk about workforce with NEDAS, but I think that some of the things that we're doing for example, here, we've got NYU Stern, our workforce committee, from Aubrey Blosser from Microsoft. She's pushing the initiative for workforce at NEDAS. And so one of the things that we're doing is we've got NYU Stern grad students here, which is kind of that first step, because I think that, again, what's the net result here? The net result is turnover. And you've got to bring in new people. There's a major cost for having to hire new talent instead of having this turn and burn. So we've got to be able to figure out a way to be able to create a better mousetrap.
The research project shows us that the average baby boomer stayed on the job an average of 19.1 years. The average Gen X stayed on the job 9.2 years. The average millennial is staying on the job an average of 16 months. There's a question in the survey to C-suites and management that asks, what does it cost to replace one millennial employee in the tech field? The number one answer is $38,000 per millennial. So when you factor that $38,000 over, let's just assume, we'll go back to baby boomers and say over 19.1 years, we're not talking about a massive amount of money. We're talking about 9.2 years for Gen X, we're still not talking about a massive amount of money. But when we're talking every 16 months, we're talking about a monumental source of money that must come from somewhere. And it's not being embedded in the trajectories of growth moving forward. And so then the question becomes, if the retention rate is only 16 months, and by the way, there's another caveat to that, the average millennial is already submitted a CV, a resume, an application at the 12-month mark if they identify they're not getting what they anticipated or what they want to receive in the particular structure. But the most important question of that is how do we retain those millennials? How do we get past 16 months? And it goes back to something that Steve mentioned at the beginning. The most emphatically answered question, and I will say shockingly surprised question in all of the do you adhere and respect, that's to the millennials, do you adhere and respect to the core values of the demographics before you? The majority of non-millennials think that millennials reject the core values, but 83% of the 32,000 participants say we respect and adhere to the core values of the demographics before them. But there's another question, and it's the second most emphatically asked question, is that do you want and long for the leadership wisdom from the demographics before you? And 74% of the millennials that have answered the survey say, I do. Now, then the survey goes into to identify, to qualify what that leadership wisdom is. And it goes into mentorship. And what the research project shows us is that mentorship significantly elevates the retention rate, also the environment of talent acquisition for millennial employees in a particular structure. But what we have found with consulting with companies all over the world is that where there is a void of retention rates, where there's a void of mentorship, there is a retention rate that is extremely low, teetering on 12 months with millennial employees. So I'm encouraging you, based on the 32,000 voices in the research project, I'm encouraging you, if you want to elevate retention rates, if you want to master talent acquisition, I'm encouraging you to develop a mentorship program that will one-on-one mentor employees to the place that you desire and want them to be. And the key point to that is precisely what millennials are asking for. They're asking for you to mentor them to the place that you want them to be because they desire your leadership wisdom and your skill set moving forward.
Now, can I jump in and then ask the question, I might even put it to you, Carrie, if you don't mind, is around the question of then what is mentorship? It's great to throw this word around, but what does it actually mean?
You know, that's a great question, and we talked a little bit about that at NEDAS Boston, if many of you were there. But I think it's a question that we all need to ask ourselves. You know, what is mentorship to us and as a company, as a leader, and what are specific action items that we can take, that I can take to be a mentor or to ask for a mentor? So let's talk a little bit about that. You know, how can the audience, every single person in that chair, become a mentor or ask for a mentor?
I think there's a couple different ways. I mean, earlier before you're talking about, we were talking about money and obviously the spend. And Cisco, for example, they're going to spend $5 billion over the next 5 years for 5G. And that's fantastic, but I almost think it's not even enough because the way that they're explaining how they're going to be pushing, it's all infrastructure based, but what about talent? What about people? So you talk about the mentorship part, and I think that it really has to be organic because millennials and also Generation Z, they want total transparency. Mm-hmm. So, you know, they are Generation Z especially because they might even surpass millennials with some of the jobs because they are true natives when it comes to the digital age. So that makes a huge difference. They were born with YouTube. Mm-hmm. They were used to FaceTime. If FaceTime doesn't work, there's something wrong. So that changes everything. So it's grassroots, the expectation of transparency, but then also I think you have to have that one-on-one time, like you said.
I'll share with you all a concept that I heard of that I actually find quite interesting, and it's the idea of 180 mentoring, where it's also mentoring up. Because what happens is, you know, as you talk about the Gen Z, they're born digital. I know I'm saying Z instead of Z. I love it too. It's Gen Z. But, you know, because there's a lot that can be learned, both up and down. There's definitely at the executive level, there's a lot of knowledge, experience, professionalism that can be learned. But then at the millennial, the Gen Z level also, we're born more digital. So I think having a two-way conversation is very helpful. I mentor, I'm involved in the URLI's mentor program, and my mentee shows me how to use Slack and tells me about other social media trends that are going on because I'm not privy to this. I'm hearing what Slack this is for somebody else that can answer this. You know, so I think it's a two-way dialogue also in understanding what the emerging trends are as well as, passing over that experience.
Yes, I would agree that it's a fiduciary relationship, moving back and forth. I had the honor a couple of years ago to give a TED Talk on the subject matter. And after the TED Talk, a young millennial came to me and he asked me if I would be interested in joining a mentorship program. And I was super impressed with this young man and his accomplishments. And so I agreed. When I returned home to Athens, Georgia, he sent me the information, and I was completely caught off guard that he wasn't asking me to mentor him. He was asking to mentor me. And so the point is this, is that, and to Steve's point, when we are authentic in our mentorship program, and we're willing to not only give, but we're also willing to receive, it's a win-win for everyone, because there is some great benefit of an employee base who is not only connected, but understands their employee base. Because this is a statement I like to say a lot. No one understands a millennial like a millennial. Gen X does not understand a millennial like a millennial. And when we can use and we can secure the voice of our millennial employees, it puts us in a place where we're securing growth and fortifying profitability moving forward. But if we suppress that voice, if we do not have a mentorship program, or if we suppress the voice as far as innovative ideas of value, we're going to find our we're going to find our company, our bottom line of our company, struggling with growth and profitability because we're losing the most important employee base that we'll have. Because one of the things that the research project shows us is there may not be another time in the history of any of our companies that we have the opportunity for growth like we have right now with the employee base of millennials. So I want to encourage everyone to develop a mentorship program. And inside the book, I'm not here to sell the book because I don't make one penny off the book. The book supports the research project. But inside the book, one of the things it does, it gives us a detailed synopsis of how to develop a mentorship program and also how to secure the growth and fortify profitability with the millennial customer base.
No, I was just curious. I'd heard you speak, Kent, and many of us could speak to this, the conflict that's happening right now with the baby boomers and the millennials. And we hear it all the time. I own a staffing firm, and we hear it all the time from clients. It's like, oh, those millennials, and they're lazy and entitled. And, there's a massive conflict here. So I'd really like to talk about that and dispel some of these myths that we have, us baby boomers or Gen Xers have around millennials.
Can I just jump in for a second and just, there was actually a talk that I saw online. It was quite interesting. It was a guy coming to the defense of millennials. And what he was basically saying is, remember that the generations before created the millennials.
Yeah. Yes.
The sound of
as a
one
matter
hand
of fact,
clapping.
one of the things that the research shows us, because the low retention rates are an attribute to the low retention rates, is task failure. So we see a workforce that has the smallest and simplest of task failure that do not know how to respond to that task failure. And as a result, they move on or they migrate to the next job as a result of a small task failure. Well, what can we attribute that to? And this is an attribute that millennials absolutely despise, but it is not their fault. Millennials have been identified as the trophy generation, and which means that everyone got a trophy when they were being reared or being raised, no matter whether they won or they lost. The problem is that does not assimilate into the workforce very well. So when we have a small task failure and we're expecting a trophy, but we don't get the trophy, we migrate to the next position. And that has lent its way into the attributes of the first question in both of the surveys says this: what is the first word that comes to your mind when you think of a millennial? What is the first word that comes to your mind when you think of a millennial? The top three answers have stayed static for the 3 years of the research project. The number one answer is entitled, the second one is lazy, and the third one is selfish. But when the question is asked to millennials, the number one answer is innovation. The number one is optimistic, and the number three is aggressive. And so I want to encourage you to not only develop a mentorship program to elevate these retention rates, but I also want to encourage you to tap into the innovative, the optimistic, the encouraging customer and client base that you have.
I was going to say 2 words, gap year, because they take gap years. But I think that if you're looking at the apprenticeship side of things and taking a next step, Verizon has a 5G program where they've donated $1 million to 7 universities to be able to get into tech. And I think if you look at the incubator type processes and having this apprenticeship opportunity, it's almost like we're the Mike Rose of 5G. And I think that with NEDAS, for example, with the workforce, get involved, whether it's going to be your company and take somebody out for a cup of coffee, spend extra time, but not just one time. You've got to get back and engage on a regular basis. And I think that, again, they see that transparency, they respect that, and if you're consistent with it, they're going to open up, and then you have longevity.
Yeah.
Nikki, any parting thoughts here?
I'm a little bit cut by all the millennial bashing.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you very much, panelists, and thank you for attending and listening. I definitely want you to take a moment to speak with the panelists. Dr. Wessinger is going to be in the back. There's a table here where he's available to you. He's going to be here all day, all night, and all day tomorrow, and just get together with him and get your questions answered. So thank you very, very much for being here.
Now, hang on. Before we, that's very bright. We're going to do literally one question while we still have you trapped up on the stage. I'm going to toss this over to Gary.
Okay.
Hey guys, my name is Gary Terrell. I have to say, Nikki, I love your passion. I have several millennials myself, and I actually hire a lot of millennials. We're actually finding, and this debate's great from your research, your approach, Steve, Carrie, industry. We're finding at the large scale that, it's not so much catering, okay? And I'm seeing the turnaround, when it comes to stress. My father used to call it the paddling effect, okay? If you knew you had to fail and you knew failure was your option, were you willing to own up to the responsibility? And my problem is, at work, when I reach to that point, and it might not just always be millennials, but right now, when I'm looking at the future workforce, millennials being 50% of it, how do we teach them old-fashioned core values? It's okay to fail. Celebrate failure. Celebrate failure more than one time. Eventually, you'll celebrate success. My problem is, and I love to talk to you about this, is I can't celebrate failure because their phone doesn't explain that to them. And more importantly, when I do mentorships, I make them leave their phones outside, okay? For the first half hour, I will bore them to death, purposely, all right? The next half hour, I'll start asking them questions. You went to college for a CCIE, okay? I paid $220,000 for a CCIE. I'm gonna pay you $60 because you're too dangerous. You're coming out of college with a CCIE, and all of a sudden you gotta realize in 3 years, you're not a CCIE anymore because you didn't jump out of college and you weren't taught that, hey, college is over, time to start over again, because in 3 years, my life will change, and salary's not it. I went to college to get a CCIE in my BS, and now I just went to college and got a BS because my CC is no good. And
Let's go ahead and answer the question, I think. Yeah.
so I'm sorry.
I'll keep the answer brief, but what I do with my interns is I let them fail, and I let them fail royally, but I'm there to support them. If they haven't finished something in time for an important meeting, I ask for it. I say, look, we actually needed a deadlines are important. Just so you know, the client's going to go berserk. I'm going to let it happen. I'm going to take the blame for it, but you can see why it's important when they go berserk. And once they see that, I take the blame on their behalf, then they get, yeah, it kind of matters.
What I can say from our side is we're opening up to more universities. So with NEDAS DC, same thing with NYU Stern, we're going to be doing the same thing for future events. So continue to bring them in, give them a platform.
I wanted to name the book based on the research project because I have 3 millennial children and I would not have seen this before the research project, but I wanted to name the book The Greatest Generation, the greatest workforce generation that we've known in our lifetime. And so I want to encourage you to recognize that we sit in front of a great opportunity with a workforce that's willing to grow and willing to learn and is not rejecting our core values or our leadership wisdom moving forward. Is that it?
And now you may make your official thank yous.
Very good. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.
All right. Thanks so much.